Hungry triplets are forcefully removed from a fancy restaurant, but when a young billionaire follows them to the sidewalk, the truth he discovers makes everyone burst into tears. The sun was setting over the city, casting long shadows that stretched like dark fingers across the busy streets. Amid the rush of cars and hurried pedestrians, three small figures stood out, moving with a determination unusual for children so young. Emma, Olivia, and Ava, 4-year-old triplets, walked hand in hand, their wide, expressive eyes scanning every storefront and every door, searching for anything that could ease the hunger gnawing at them. Emma, the tallest of the three by mere millimeters, led the way. Her brown hair, normally woven into elaborate braids, was disheveled after a long day playing in the park near their home. Stray strands framed her face, giving her a wild appearance that contrasted with the determination in her hazel eyes. Olivia, the middle one, clung tightly to her sister's hand, her small fingers interlaced as though she feared their human chain might break at any moment. Her blue eyes, usually filled with joy and curiosity, were now wide with worry and excitement. She bit her lower lip, a habit that had surfaced in the last few weeks since their dad had been taken to the hospital. Ava, the smallest and quietest, followed behind, nervously sucking her thumb. It was a habit their mum always tried to discourage, but in recent weeks, with Sarah so sick and distracted, Ava had returned to the familiar comfort of her thumb. Her eyes, identical in shape to her sister's, but a darker shade of brown, darted back and forth, silently taking in every detail of the world around her. At first glance, the three looked identical, but for those who knew them well, each had her own distinct personality. Emma was the natural leader, always ready for a new adventure, with a courage that sometimes bordered on recklessness. Olivia was the peacemaker, sensitive to others' emotions, always ready with a hug or a kind word. Ava was the dreamer, often lost in her own world of fantasy, seeing magic and possibilities where others saw only the ordinary. That night, however, all three were united by a common goal: finding food. The tempting smell of a fancy restaurant nearby made their stomachs growl in unison, a cruel reminder of how long it had been since their last proper meal. The girls stopped, gazing in wonder at the restaurant's elegant facade. Large glass windows allowed them to see the well-lit interior, where well-dressed people enjoyed dishes that looked straight out of a fairy tale. Tables draped in immaculate white linens, gleaming silverware, and colorful plates that made the girls' mouths water. "There," Emma whispered, pointing to a partially open side window. A thin curl of smoke escaped, carrying with it the irresistible aroma of freshly baked bread and rich sauces. "We can get in through there." Olivia hesitated, her face a mix of longing and apprehension. "But Mom said we shouldn't leave the house," she protested weakly, her voice betraying the inner conflict between obedience and hunger. "Mom is sick," Emma argued, her voice low but firm. "She can't cook. And Dad—" Her voice faltered for a moment, a shadow crossing her young face. "Dad isn't here." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of everything that had changed in their young lives in recent weeks. Their father's accident, their mother's illness, the long hours alone at home while Sarah struggled to keep things together. Ava, sensing her sister's sadness, squeezed their little hands. "I'm hungry," she murmured, her voice almost inaudible, but loaded with a need they all felt down to their bones. Driven by a determination born of desperation, the three girls crept toward the window. Their hearts pounded in their chests, a mixture of fear and excitement coursing through their veins. Emma, being the tallest, helped her sisters climb up first. She interlaced her fingers, creating a makeshift step for Olivia, who, with a small jump and a grunt of effort, managed to hoist herself onto the windowsill. Olivia reached out for Ava, pulling her younger sister up with surprising strength for someone so small. For one terrifying moment, Ava teetered precariously on the ledge, her eyes wide with fear. But Olivia held on tight, and together they slipped into the restaurant. Emma was the last to enter, her movements agile and silent like a cat. She cast a final glance at the street, making sure no one had seen them, before joining her sisters inside. The interior was a world of luxury the girls had never seen before. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, casting a soft, shimmering light over the room. Tables draped with pristine white linens were arranged in elegant patterns across the dining area. Polished silverware gleamed under the gentle light, and the clinking of crystal glasses blended with the low murmur of refined conversations. The triplets stood frozen for a moment, absorbing the grandeur around them. Their wide eyes reflected the twinkling lights, and for a second they completely forgot the hunger that had led them there. It was as though they had stepped into another world, a fairy tale realm where princesses dined and princes whispered secrets over sparkling wine glasses. It was Ava who brought them back to reality. Her stomach growled loudly, a surprisingly resonant sound from such a small body. The noise seemed to echo in the elegant dining room, reminding them why they had embarked on this risky adventure. The three exchanged glances, a silent agreement passing between them. Emma nodded once, determined, before stealthily moving toward the kitchen. Olivia and Ava followed closely, their small shadows dancing across the walls as they moved between tables. The buzz of conversation and the clinking of silverware masked their tiny footsteps. Emma led the way, her eyes alert for any sign of danger. Olivia followed closely, one hand gripping Ava's tightly, the other ready to cover her younger sister's mouth if she made any noise. As they neared the kitchen doors, the smell of food grew stronger, making their mouths water. The aroma of roasted meat, rich sauces and exotic spices hung in the air, so tangible they could almost taste it. They were so close, just a few more steps. Suddenly, a deep, authoritative voice thundered behind them. "Hey, what are you doing here?" The girls froze, fear shooting down their spines like an icy bolt. Slowly, as if guided by invisible strings, they turned to face the source of the voice. A tall, imposing man in a sharp suit, wearing an expression of shock and indignation, glared at them. His face, normally composed in a mask of professional courtesy, was now contorted with a mix of surprise and anger. He was the restaurant's manager, and he looked none too pleased at the sight of these tiny intruders. "How did you get in here?" he demanded, his voice growing louder with each word, drawing the attention of nearby patrons. "Where are your parents?" Summoning all the courage she could muster, Emma stepped forward. She lifted her chin, trying to appear taller and more confident than she felt. "Please, sir," she began, her voice trembling slightly but gaining strength as she spoke. "We're just hungry. Our mum is sick and—" "Hungry?" the manager interrupted, his face turning red with anger. Veins bulged on his forehead, and his nostrils flared like a furious bull. "This is a high-class establishment, not a shelter for street kids." His harsh words fell on the girls like a physical blow. Olivia and Ava began to cry, large silent tears streaming down their chubby cheeks. They clung to each other, shaking like leaves in the wind. Emma, however, remained firm. Her small fists clenched at her sides, and she stared at the manager with a mix of fear and indignation. "We're not street kids," she protested, her little voice full of a dignity beyond her years. "Our dad—" "I don't want to hear it," the manager shouted, his voice echoing through the now silent restaurant. All eyes were on them, some patrons watching in horror, others in morbid curiosity. The manager grabbed Emma by the arm, his fingers digging tightly into her small limb. "You're leaving right now." He began dragging Emma toward the exit, his long strides forcing the girl to stumble and practically run to keep up. Olivia and Ava ran after them, crying and pleading for him to let their sister go. "Please, sir," Olivia sobbed, her words nearly unintelligible through her tears. "We just wanted a little food." Ava, unable to form coherent words, simply cried, a high, desperate wail that seemed to cut through the restaurant air. The patrons watched with a mixture of shock and discomfort. Some murmured disapproval, shaking their heads at the manager's harsh treatment. Others looked away, ashamed, as if the sight of hungry, frightened children marred their elegant dining experience. An elderly lady seated near the door stood abruptly, her face a mask of indignation. "This is outrageous," she exclaimed, her voice trembling with emotion. "They're just hungry children." But the manager ignored the protests, determined to remove what he saw as a threat to his establishment's reputation. He practically dragged Emma to the door, Olivia and Ava sprinting behind, their little legs struggling to keep up. With a harsh shove, the manager pushed Emma outside. The girl stumbled onto the sidewalk, falling to her knees. Olivia and Ava, close on her heels, couldn't stop in time and fell on top of their sister, forming a pile of small limbs and sobs on the cold pavement. "And don't come back!" the manager shouted, his face red with anger. He cast one final look of contempt at the children before slamming the door, the sound echoing through the almost empty street. The triplets stayed there, a trembling heap of sorrow and hunger. Emma, always the protector, was the first to stand. She helped Olivia and Ava sit up, quickly checking them for injuries. Their knees were scraped and dirty, small spots of blood appearing where the skin had been scraped against the rough concrete. "It's okay," Emma murmured, her voice trembling slightly as she fought back her own tears. "We're okay. Let's go home." But the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Home meant a cold, empty apartment, a mother too sick to get out of bed, and stomachs that would remain empty and aching. Meanwhile, across the street, a tall, well-dressed man was walking along the sidewalk, oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded. Michael Thompson, at 32, was the kind of person who naturally drew stares. His impeccably tailored suit, crafted by one of the best tailors in the country, fit perfectly across his broad shoulders. His Italian leather shoes gleamed under the streetlights, each step echoing with a sound that practically shouted success and wealth. But there was more to Michael than his appearance as a young billionaire. His deep blue eyes held a depth that spoke of experiences beyond his years. There was compassion in that gaze, an empathy that contrasted sharply with his image as a successful executive. Michael was the owner of Thompson Construction, one of the biggest contracting firms in the country. He had inherited the company from his father only 3 years earlier, after a tragedy that still haunted him. The sudden, violent death of his father in a construction accident had not only catapulted Michael to the family company's leadership, but also left him with deep emotional scars and a keen sense of responsibility. Since taking over Thompson Construction, Michael had devoted himself not just to expanding the business, but also to improving working conditions and safety on all of his sites. Every decision he made was influenced by the memory of his father and the desire to prevent other families from experiencing the same pain his had endured. That night, he was on his way to a business dinner at the same fancy restaurant where the triplets had ventured. As he approached the entrance, something caught his attention. The sound of raised voices and children crying made him stop in his tracks. The doors of the restaurant flew open violently, and Michael watched in horror as a man shoved 3 small girls outside. The children tripped over the sidewalk, falling to their knees. The man, whom Michael recognized as the restaurant manager, was red-faced with anger. "And don't come back," he yelled before slamming the door behind him. Michael stood frozen for a moment, shocked by the scene he'd just witnessed. The 3 little girls, identical in appearance, were sobbing uncontrollably on the sidewalk. Their dresses, which must have once been pretty, were dirty and torn. Their faces, streaked with tears and dirt, showed a blend of fear, shame, and hunger. Without hesitation, Michael walked over to the children. He knelt beside them, ignoring the fact that his expensive suit was now in contact with the grimy pavement. "Hey, it's okay," he said gently, trying not to scare them further. "Are you hurt?" The girls looked at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then the one who seemed to be the leader, Emma, stepped forward. "Turn," she stammered, wiping her nose on her sleeve. We were just hungry." Michael's heart clenched at those words. He looked from one girl to the other, noting their thin bodies and sunken cheeks. It was obvious this wasn't the first time they'd gone hungry. "Where are your parents?" he asked gently. It was Olivia who answered this time, her voice broken by sobs. "Mom's sick. She can't cook. And Dad—" She paused, unable to continue. Ava, the smallest of the 3, finished in a whisper. "Dad's in the hospital. He got hurt." Michael felt a pang in his chest. The girl's words brought back memories he struggled to keep buried. Memories of his own father, injured and unable to work. He shook his head, forcing himself to focus on the present. These girls needed help, and he was in a position to provide it. "Come with me," he said, standing up and extending his hands to the triplets. "Let's get you something to eat." The girls hesitated, Years of warnings not to talk to strangers clashing with their desperate hunger. Emma was the one who made the decision, taking Michael's hand confidently. Olivia and Ava followed their sister's lead, and soon all four figures were walking down the sidewalk toward a nearby diner. As they walked, Michael couldn't help but notice the looks they received from passers-by. Some were curious, others judgmental. He could imagine what they were thinking, a well-dressed man leading three ragged little girls somewhere, but he didn't care. All that mattered at that moment was helping these children. At the diner, Michael ordered burgers, fries, and milkshakes for the girls. While waiting for the food, he tried to talk to them, hoping to learn more about their situation. "So," he began, keeping his voice calm and friendly, "you said your dad is in the hospital. Do you know what happened to him?" The three girls exchanged looks, as though silently deciding what to say. Finally, Emma spoke. "Dad got hurt at work," she said, her eyes filling with tears again. "He fell. Mum said he broke a lot of bones." Michael felt his heart tighten once more. Workplace accidents were a terrible reality, something with which he was painfully familiar. "I'm really sorry to hear that," he said softly. "It must be so hard for you." Olivia nodded, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. "We miss Dad," she whispered. "And Mom cries a lot." Before Michael could ask any more questions, the food arrived. The girls attacked the burgers with a ferocity that broke Michael's heart. It was obvious they hadn't had a decent meal in days. As the triplets ate, Michael wrestled with his own thoughts and emotions. Their situation touched him deeply, stirring memories of his own childhood and the loss of his father. He wondered about their dad, the kind of accident he'd had, the circumstances that led this family to such desperation. Then there was the question of the workers' family. Clearly, they were facing extreme hardship, a sick mother, unable to care for the children. The girls, so desperate for food they'd tried sneaking into a restaurant. Michael felt compelled to help. This man, whoever he was, had been injured, and his family was suffering the consequences. How could Michael turn his back on them? As he watched the girls eat, Michael made a decision. He would help this family no matter what it cost. But first, he needed to know more. "Girls," he said softly once they'd finished eating, "can you tell me where you live? I'd like to take you home and talk to your mom." The triplets looked at each other again, hesitation clear on their faces. But something in Michael's kind expression must have convinced them, because Emma nodded slowly. "We can show you the way," she said. As they stood to leave the diner, Michael noticed the girls looked exhausted. It had been a long and emotionally draining day for them. Without thinking twice, he bent down and scooped Ava into his arms. The little girl, surprised at first, soon relaxed against him, resting her head on his shoulder. Emma and Olivia took his hands, and together they walked into the night. As they made their way through the city streets, Michael couldn't help but notice the stares they received. Some were curious, some disapproving. He could only imagine the thoughts running through people's minds, a wealthy businessman escorting three ragged children, but he didn't care. All that mattered was helping these kids. As they left the downtown area, the elegant buildings gave way to more modest structures. The streets grew narrower and dimmer. Michael realized they were entering a working-class neighborhood, the kind of place where many construction workers likely lived. Finally, after about 20 minutes of walking, the girls stopped in front of a small apartment building. The paint was peeling, and several windows were broken or patched with tape. Michael's heart sank, thinking of the triplets living in such conditions. Emma led the group up to the third floor, stopping at a worn-out door. She hesitated for a moment before knocking softly. "Mom," she called, her voice trembling slightly. "Mom, we're home." There was a moment of silence, followed by the sound of shuffling steps. The door opened slowly, revealing a pale, thin woman with dark circles under her eyes. Her face lit up upon seeing the girls, but quickly twisted into an expression of worry and confusion at the sight of Michael. Who are you?" she asked, her voice hoarse and weak. Gently, Michael set Ava down and stepped forward, extending his hand. "My name is Michael Thompson. I found your daughters on the street. They were hungry." The woman, Sarah, Michael assumed, covered her mouth with her hand. tears welling in her eyes. "Oh my God," she whispered. "I fell asleep. I didn't realize they'd gone out. I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." She began to sob, her frail body shaking with the force of her emotion. The triplets ran to hug her, their own tears mingling with hers. Michael felt a lump in his throat. The scene before him was heartbreaking, a clearly loving family, torn apart by illness and poverty. "Sarah," he said gently, "may I come in? I think we need to talk." Sarah nodded silently, stepping back to let him in. The apartment was small and sparse, but clean. Michael noticed a pile of medical bills on the kitchen table, along with several bottles of medication. While Sarah sat with the girls on the worn-out sofa, Michael remained standing, feeling out of place in a world so different from his own realm of luxury and privilege. "Sarah," he began, "your daughters told me about your husband's accident. I'd like to help." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise, and, for a moment, Michael saw a flicker of hope there. But it was quickly replaced by resignation. "That's very kind of you," she said softly, "but we can't accept charity. We'll manage somehow." Michael shook his head. "It's not charity, Sarah. It's the right thing to do. No one should go hungry, especially children." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'd like to help cover your husband's medical expenses and make sure you have food on the table. I can make some calls, maybe get a nurse to help with his care, too." Sarah looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and skepticism. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why do you care?" Michael felt the weight of his own memories pressing on him. "Because I know what it's like to go through hard times," he said softly, "and because no one should have to endure what you're going through." Tears returned to Sarah's eyes, but this time they were tears of relief. The girls, sensing their mother's shift in mood, began to smile tentatively. "Thank you," Sarah said, her voice choked with emotion. "I don't know how we'll ever repay you." Michael raised his hand, gently interrupting her. "There's no need. Just let me help, please." Sarah nodded, unable to speak. The triplets looked from their mother to Michael, their faces a mixture of confusion and hope. "Now," Michael said, turning his attention to the girls, "how about we go do some shopping? Let's fill that pantry." The triplets' eyes lit up at the idea. Even Sarah seemed to perk up a little. "Can I go too?" she asked hesitantly. "I feel a bit better now." Michael smiled. "Of course you can. Let's all go together." As they left the apartment, Michael felt a surge of mixed emotions, compassion, determination, and a growing sense that his life was about to change dramatically. He didn't know exactly how or why, but something told him that meeting these hungry triplets was just the beginning of a much bigger journey. With the girls skipping ahead and Sarah walking slowly by his side, Michael closed the apartment door, ready for the next step in this unexpected adventure. He knew there was much to discover: the nature of the girl's father's accident, the circumstances that pushed this family to the brink of despair, and how he could use his resources to make a real difference in their lives. As they descended the stairs, Michael made a silent promise to himself. He would get to the bottom of this. He would find out what had happened to the girl's father and do whatever it took to help this family and any others who were facing similar difficulties. The group stepped out into the night, stars glittering above like tiny beacons of hope. And though the future was still uncertain, for the first time in weeks, the triplets and their mother felt that maybe, just maybe, things might get better. As for Michael, he felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, but also a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in a long time. He didn't know what the future held, but he was determined to make a difference one step at a time. After a week of helping Sarah and the triplets with food, medications, and basic care, Michael finally convinced the family to visit John in the hospital. The day dawned grey, as though the sky reflected the apprehension hovering over them as they made their way to the hospital. Michael guided his luxurious car through the city streets, casting occasional glances in the rearview mirror at the 4 passengers in the back seat. Sarah sat stiffly, her hands clasped in her lap, while the triplets squirmed with a mix of excitement and nerves. Upon arriving at the hospital, Michael helped Sarah and the girls out of the car. The contrast between the sleek vehicle and the modestly dressed family did not go unnoticed by passers-by, but Michael ignored the curious stares, focusing only on getting everyone inside. The familiar antiseptic smell and sterile atmosphere made the triplets huddle closer to their mother. Gemma, always the leader, clung firmly to Sarah's hand while Olivia and Ava clung to each other. "What's the room number?" Michael asked Sarah quietly. 307, she replied, her voice trembling with contained emotion. They took the elevator to the third floor, silence weighing heavily between them. When the doors opened, Sarah hesitated briefly before taking the first step out. Michael placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's okay," he murmured. "We're here with you." Sarah nodded, grateful, and together they walked down the corridor until they reached the door to room 307. Sarah knocked softly before opening the door. "John?" she called, her voice barely above a whisper. A middle-aged man lay in the hospital bed, his body covered in casts and bandages. Despite his condition, his eyes lit up at the sight of his family. "Sarah, girls!" he exclaimed, his voice hoarse with emotion. The triplets ran to the bed, their voices blending in a cacophony of "Dad, Dad!" John tried to sit up but grimaced in pain. Sarah quickly stepped forward, helping him settle while the girls crowded around the bed, eager to touch their father, to make sure he was real. Michael stood back, watching the scene with a lump in his throat. The joy on John's face, mixed with evident physical pain, was heartbreaking. After a few moments of careful hugs and tearful kisses, John noticed Michael. "And who are you?" he asked, caution lacing his voice. Sarah turned, as though she had momentarily forgotten Michael's presence. "Oh, John, this is Michael. He's been helping us a lot since your accident." Michael stepped forward, extending his hand. "It's nice to meet you, sir. I hope you're recovering well." John gripped Michael's hand with surprising strength for someone in his condition. "Thank you for taking care of my family," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "There's no need for repayment," Michael assured him. "I'm happy to help." John nodded, but Michael could see the worry in his eyes. "Sarah," John said, turning to his wife, "how have you been managing the bills?" Sarah cast a quick glance at Michael before responding. It's okay, John. Michael has been helping with the expenses." John frowned, clearly uncomfortable at the idea of relying on a stranger's generosity. "That's very kind, but we can't accept—" "Please," Michael interjected gently, "don't think of it as charity. Think of it as a loan, if you prefer. Something you can pay back whenever you're back on your feet." John seemed to consider that for a moment, before nodding reluctantly. "Speaking of work," he said, his voice dropping, "I don't know when or if I'll be able to go back. The doctors say the recovery will be long, and even then—" He let the sentence hang, the fear of the future clear in his eyes. "What kind of work do you do, John?" Michael asked, though he already suspected the answer. "I'm a construction worker," John replied. "I was working on that new skyscraper downtown. You've probably seen the scaffolding. It's impossible to miss." Michael felt his heart speed up. This was exactly what he feared. John had been working on one of Thompson Construction's projects. "The conditions there," John continued, his voice low so the children, now quietly playing in the corner of the room, wouldn't overhear. "They weren't the best. Many of us complained about safety, but—" He shrugged, a gesture that seemed to cause him pain. Michael struggled to keep his expression neutral, but inside, anger and guilt roiled. How could this happen on one of his construction sites? He had implemented strict safety protocols after his father's death. Clearly, something had gone terribly wrong. "John," Michael said, his voice calm despite the internal storm, "I promise you I'm going to look into this. No one should get hurt on the job because of inadequate safety measures." John looked at Michael with surprise and gratitude. You do that? But why? You don't even know me." Michael hesitated, carefully choosing his next words. He wasn't ready to reveal his true identity yet, but he felt he owed John some explanation. "Let's just say I have connections in the construction industry," he finally said. "And I strongly believe all workers deserve a safe work environment." John nodded slowly, a spark of hope in his eyes for the first time since they entered the room. While the family continued chatting, Michael stepped away, his mind racing with the implications of what he'd just discovered. He knew he had a lot of work ahead, investigating the accident, fixing any safety lapses, making sure it never happened again. But looking at John, Sarah, and the triplets, Michael felt a renewed determination. He would do whatever it took to set things right, not just for this family, but for all his workers. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in a long while, Michael felt he was on the right track. With one last look at the reunited family, he made a silent promise. He would change things, one project at a time, one family at a time. The rest of the visit passed in a swirl of emotions. The triplets, delighted to see their father awake and alert, recounted their adventures from the past few days, carefully omitting the restaurant incident. Sarah alternated between relief at seeing John awake and lucid, and visible worry whenever her gaze fell on the various monitors and machines around his bed. Michael watched all of this with a mix of compassion and growing determination. Every smile from John, every wince of pain, every concerned glance shared between him and Sarah, all of it solidified Michael's resolve to make significant changes at his company. When it was time to leave, the farewells were emotional. The girls carefully hugged their father, promising to return soon. Sarah kissed her husband, whispering words of encouragement. John, in turn, shook Michael's hand once more, his eyes conveying a gratitude words couldn't capture. As they left the hospital, the sky had brightened slightly, as if reflecting the family's renewed hope. Michael helped everyone back into the car, his mind already planning the next steps. He knew he had a lot of work ahead, investigations to conduct, policies to review, changes to implement. Driving back to the family's apartment, Michael glanced again in the rearview mirror. The triplets had fallen asleep, exhausted by the day's emotions. Sarah stared out the window, lost in thought. The scene only strengthened Michael's determination. He would do whatever it took to ensure this family, and all families under his responsibility, never had to endure something like this again. With that firm resolve in mind, Michael continued driving, aware that the journey ahead would be challenging, but feeling, for the first time in a long while, genuinely purposeful in his mission. Early the next morning, Michael woke with renewed determination. John's words about poor working conditions echoed in his mind, mingling with painful memories of his own father. He knew he could no longer postpone investigating what was really happening at Thompson Construction's work sites. Dressing in more casual clothes than his usual executive suit, Michael got into his car and headed to the first construction site. He decided to start with the newest project, a residential complex on the outskirts of the city. Upon arrival, he presented himself as a safety consultant hired by the company, a half-truth that would give him access without raising suspicion. The site manager, a burly man named Frank, greeted Michael with a mix of surprise and distrust. "We weren't informed about any inspection today," he said, scratching his graying beard. Michael smiled, keeping his cool. "It was a last-minute decision by management. We're doing random checks on all projects." Frank shrugged, apparently convinced. "All right, then. Follow me. I'll show you around." As they walked the site, Michael examined every detail. He immediately noticed that many workers weren't wearing proper protective gear. Helmets were missing on several heads, and the few in use looked worn and poorly maintained. "Frank," Michael called, pointing to a group of workers on scaffolding. "Why aren't those men wearing safety harnesses?" The manager looked uncomfortable. "Oh, well, we've had some supply issues with the gear. We're waiting on a new shipment," Michael frowned. "And how long have they been working without the proper equipment?" Frank hesitated before answering. "Maybe 2 weeks." Michael's stomach churned. 2 weeks was more than enough time for serious accidents to occur. He made a mental note to check the records of equipment orders later. Continuing the inspection, Michael found other irregularities. Unstable ladders, exposed electrical wires, lack of proper signage in dangerous areas. Each new discovery heightened his concern and guilt. At the end of the day, after visiting 2 more construction sites and finding similar problems at all of them, Michael returned to his office, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He sat in his leather chair, gazing out the window at the city skyline dotted with the skyscrapers his company had built. An internal conflict consumed him. As the company owner, he was ultimately responsible for everything that happened on these work sites. Every oversight, every cost-cutting measure that compromised safety, every accident. Ultimately, it all fell under his watch. Michael closed his eyes, letting memories flood his mind. He was 12 years old again, anxiously waiting for his dad to come home from work. He remembered the phone call, his mother's trembling voice, the hospital. His father, always so strong and energetic, lying motionless in a bed with tubes and machines everywhere. The accident that took his father's life was caused by defective safety equipment. At the time, Thompson Construction was only a mid-sized company struggling to compete with industry giants. Cost cuts and shortcuts were common. His father, a site supervisor, often voiced concerns about working conditions, but his warnings were frequently ignored in favor of profit and efficiency. Michael opened his eyes, feeling hot tears roll down his cheeks. He had vowed that when he took over the company, he would do things differently. That workers' safety would always be the top priority. How had he let things get to this point? In that moment, Michael made a decision. He would personally inspect every Thompson Construction project in progress. No matter how long it took or how much it cost, he would see the truth for himself at each site. Over the following days, Michael visited site after site. At each one, he introduced himself as a safety consultant, observing, asking questions, taking notes. The pattern of negligence that emerged was alarming. Inadequate or missing protective gear, ignored safety procedures, insufficient training. The list of problems seemed endless. During his visit to the 10th site, a skyscraper in the heart of the city, Michael finally found the connection he'd been searching for. Reviewing the employee list, he saw the name, John Martinez, the triplets' father. Michael's heart raced. This was where John had been injured. Determined to uncover the exact circumstances, he deepened his investigation. Talking with workers, Michael heard stories that horrified him. Many spoke of pressure to meet impossible deadlines, of faulty equipment that wasn't replaced, of ignored warnings. An older worker, noticing Michael's genuine concern, pulled him aside. "You know," he said in a low voice, "John, the one who got hurt, he warned everyone about problems with the scaffolding. Said it wasn't safe, but the supervisor told him to go up anyway." Michael felt a wave of nausea. The negligence was not just systemic, it was deliberate and criminal. Climbing up to the floor where the accident had occurred, Michael examined the area. Even weeks later, he could see remnants of what had happened. The scaffolding had been replaced, but the marks on the concrete told a grim story. Standing there, staring at the empty space where John had almost lost his life, another memory ambushed Michael. He was a teenager again, visiting the place where his father had died. Back then, he swore he would bring justice, that he would change the construction industry for the better. Where had that idealism gone? Tears in his eyes, Michael made another silent promise. This time, he wouldn't fail. No matter the cost, no matter who he had to confront, he would make Thompson Construction a model of safety and ethics in the industry. Returning to the site office, Michael requested to see all safety records, accident reports, and training documentation. The project manager, a man named David, looked visibly nervous at the request. "That might take some time to gather," David said, avoiding Michael's gaze. "Maybe you should come back another day." Michael fixed David with a firm stare. "No, I'll wait. These documents should be readily available for inspection at any time." Reluctantly, David began rummaging through files and drawers. Michael watched closely, noting how the man seemed increasingly agitated as he searched. After almost an hour, it was clear many documents were missing or incomplete. Equipment maintenance records had gaps of months. Accident reports looked edited or downplayed. John's accident, which should have prompted a full investigation, was recorded as a minor incident. Anger surged within Michael. This was not mere negligence. It was a deliberate attempt to cover up serious problems. "David," Michael said, his voice calm but loaded with authority, "I want you to gather the entire management team for this project for a meeting tomorrow morning. All supervisors, all safety officers. Understood?" David paled but nodded. Yes, sir. But who should I say is calling the meeting? Michael hesitated for a moment before replying, Tell them Michael Thompson, the owner of the company, will be here to discuss urgent safety issues. David's eyes widened in shock. You're... Yes, Michael confirmed. And tomorrow, we're going to have a long talk about this company's future and how we treat our workers. Walking away from the site, Michael felt a mix of emotions: rage, guilt, determination. He knew the next day would be hard, confronting those responsible, admitting his own failures as a leader, initiating the necessary changes. None of it would be easy. But looking at the skyscraper rising against the dusk sky, Michael felt a spark of hope. He had the power to make a difference, to honor his father's memory, and to ensure men like John could work safely and with dignity. With that firm resolve, Michael got into his car and drove home, mentally preparing for the battle ahead. Tomorrow would be the first day of a new era for Thompson Construction, and he was determined to set things right, whatever the cost. Arriving home, Michael spent hours reviewing his notes and preparing for the next day's meeting. He knew he would face resistance, maybe even hostility, from some members of his management team. Many of them had been with the company for years, used to operating a certain way. And the changes he planned to propose would be significant and potentially expensive. While organizing his thoughts, Michael couldn't help but think about John and his family. The image of the triplets, their hopeful faces at the hospital, spurred him on. He knew what he was about to do would affect not just John, but hundreds of families who depended on Thompson Construction for their livelihood. It was past midnight when Michael finally lay down, exhausted but determined. Before drifting off, he looked at a photo of his father on the bedside table. "I'm going to do this right, Dad," he murmured. "I'll make you proud." The next morning, Michael woke before his alarm, a mix of anxiety and resolve pulsing through his veins. He dressed with care, choosing a suit that projected authority without being intimidating. Today, he needed to balance his position as the company's owner with the need to earn the trust and respect of his employees. As he drove to the site, Michael mentally rehearsed his objectives for the meeting. He wasn't just seeking to punish those responsible for negligence. His goal was to start a deep cultural shift in the company. Safety, transparency, and respect for workers needed to become Thompson Construction's fundamental pillars. Arriving at the location, Michael immediately sensed the tense atmosphere. Workers eyed him with curiosity and apprehension as he walked toward the makeshift site office. Inside, he could hear agitated voices speaking in low, urgent tones. Taking a deep breath, Michael opened the door to the meeting room. Conversations ceased instantly, and all eyes turned toward him. David Orn, the project manager, looked particularly pale and anxious. "Good morning, everyone," Michael said, his voice strong and clear. "I believe we have a lot to discuss." Moving to the front of the room, Michael knew the next few hours would be critical. The decisions made here would shape the company's future, and more importantly, the lives of countless workers and their families. With the memory of his father and the image of John and his daughters in mind, he was ready to face the challenge before him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I'm not here today just as the owner of Thompson Construction. I'm here as someone who believes we can and must do better. Let's start by reviewing what I found during my investigation, and then we'll discuss the changes we need to implement immediately." With those words, Michael began a meeting that would mark the beginning of a new era for Thompson Construction. The sun had barely risen when Michael arrived at the downtown skyscraper construction site. Normally teeming with activity at this hour, the site was eerily quiet. The workers present were huddled in small groups, speaking in hushed tones and casting nervous glances toward the project office. Michael took a deep breath, straightening his tie as he walked toward the container that served as the project's office. He knew the confrontation he was about to have with David would be difficult but necessary. Entering the office, Michael found David seated behind his desk, papers strewn about, anxiety etched on his face. "Good morning, David," Michael said, his voice calm but firm. David stood abruptly, nearly toppling his chair. "Mr. Thompson." "Finally, I didn't expect you so early." Michael studied the man before him. David had been with the company for over a decade, climbing the ranks quickly thanks to his ability to deliver projects on schedule and under budget. Until now, Michael had considered him one of his most valuable employees. "Sit down, David," Michael said, indicating the chair. "We have a lot to discuss." As David nervously complied, Michael pulled up a chair and sat on the other side of the desk, maintaining steady eye contact. "David, in the past few days, I've personally investigated our operations. What I found was deeply disturbing. I'd like to hear your explanation for the serious safety violations I discovered on this site." David swallowed hard, his gaze wavering. "Mr. Thompson, I don't know what you're talking about. We follow standard safety protocols." Michael cut him off, his voice sharp. "Don't insult my intelligence, David. I saw with my own eyes workers without proper gear. I've seen falsified maintenance records, and worst of all, the accident that gravely injured John Martinez was labeled a minor incident. I want the truth now." David's face turned pale, then took on a stubborn set. "Mr. Thompson, you don't understand the pressure we're under here. The deadlines, the costs. We had to make some adjustments to keep the project on track." "Adjustments?" Michael repeated, incredulous. "You call risking our workers' lives adjustments?" David leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "Sir, this is the biggest project in the company's history. The investors are breathing down our necks. If we don't deliver on time, the penalties will be astronomical. I had to make tough decisions. Decisions that nearly cost a man his life," Michael thundered, slamming his hand on the desk. "John Martinez has 3 little girls, David. He could have died because of your tough decisions." A heavy silence filled the office. David seemed to shrink in his chair while Michael fought to control his anger. Finally, Michael spoke again, his voice more controlled but no less intense. "David, I understand the pressure of deadlines and costs, but nothing, absolutely nothing, justifies putting our workers' lives at risk. Effective immediately, all operations on this site are suspended until we can ensure every safety protocol is strictly followed." David paled further. "But sir, the delays, the costs—" "They'll be significant, I know," Michael finished. "But the cost of a human life is infinitely higher. I'll deal with the investors and any penalties. Your task now is to prepare a detailed report of every safety violation and the corrective measures required." Standing up, Michael continued, "In 1 hour, I want all workers gathered here at the site. I'm going to speak to them personally." As Michael headed for the door, David spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Thompson, what's going to happen to me?" Michael paused, turning to face the project manager. "That depends on your cooperation from here on out, David. But know this, I will no longer tolerate any safety violations or cover-ups." "Understood." David nodded silently, and Michael left the office, leaving behind a visibly shaken man. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Michael coordinated with the company's safety team to begin a full site inspection. He also made several phone calls, preparing for the fallout his actions would bring. When the time for the meeting came, the construction site was packed. Hundreds of workers gathered, a murmur of speculation rippling through the crowd. Michael climbed onto a makeshift platform, feeling the weight of all those gazes on him. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice steady and clear. "My name is Michael Thompson. I am the owner of Thompson Construction." A buzz of surprise ran through the crowd. Many had never seen the company's owner in person. "I'm here today because I discovered something deeply troubling," Michael continued. "I found that on this site and others in our company, your safety, our workers' safety, has been compromised in the name of profit and deadlines." A stunned silence fell over the crowd. "That ends today," Michael declared firmly. "Effective immediately. All operations on this site are suspended until we can guarantee every safety protocol is being strictly followed. I know that means delays and potential financial losses for the company, but no deadline, no contract, no profit is worth more than your lives and safety." Michael paused, looking directly into the faces before him. He saw shock, confusion, but also relief and gratitude in many eyes. In the coming days, we'll conduct a full safety inspection. Every piece of equipment, every procedure will be reviewed. I need your help. If you see anything unsafe, if you have concerns, speak up. I promise you'll be heard and action will be taken." He took a deep breath before continuing. "I know many of you are worried about your jobs. Let me be clear. No one will be punished for speaking up about safety issues. In fact, we encourage it. During the suspension, everyone will continue receiving their wages." A murmur of approval spread through the crowd. "Finally," Michael concluded, "I want to apologize. As the owner of this company, the ultimate responsibility for everything that happens here is mine. I failed you by letting this situation reach this point. I promise I'll do everything in my power to fix it and make Thompson Construction a model of safety and ethics in the construction industry." When Michael finished speaking, there was a moment of stunned silence. Then slowly clapping began. It started with just a few people, but soon spread, growing until the entire site echoed with applause. As he stepped off the platform, Michael was approached by workers. Some wanted to shake his hand, others had questions or concerns to share. He listened to them all, promising action and follow-up. However, not all reactions were positive. Michael noticed a group of company executives huddled at a distance, their expressions ranging from worry to outright hostility. He knew he had tough battles ahead with the board and investors. Throughout the day, news of Michael's decision spread rapidly. His phone rang non-stop with calls from journalists, furious investors, and even curious competitors. Late in the afternoon, Michael received a surprising phone call. It was Sarah, the triplets' mother. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice quivering with emotion, "we just heard the news. Is it true? You really stopped everything to improve safety?" "Yes, Sarah," Michael replied gently. "It's true. I promised I'd do the right thing, and that's what I'm trying to do." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Then Michael heard a muffled sob. "Thank you," Sarah whispered. John will be so relieved when he finds out. The girls, they're so hopeful now." After hanging up, Michael stared out the window of the temporary site office, looking at the now silent construction site. He knew the coming days would be difficult. There would be resistance, criticism, perhaps even legal threats from angry investors. But then he thought of John, of Sarah, of the triplets. He thought of the workers' faces that morning, filled with renewed hope. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that he was doing the right thing. The sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the skeletal steel and concrete of the unfinished skyscraper. To Michael, it looked like an apt symbol, the end of one era and the start of another. An era in which Thompson Construction would not be known just for its towering buildings, but for how it valued and protected the people who built them. With a sigh of determination, Michael turned his attention back to the stack of documents on his desk. There was much work to be done, many changes to implement. But for the first time in a long while, he felt truly on the right path. Night fell over the construction site, but for Michael Thompson and the workers of Thompson Construction, it was the dawn of a new day. The next morning, Michael arrived early at the site, determined to carry on with the changes he had begun. The place felt different. There was an energy in the air, a mix of expectancy and apprehension. As he walked the site, Michael was approached by several workers. Some wanted to personally thank him. Others had suggestions for safety improvements. He listened to all of them attentively, taking notes and promising action. In the makeshift office, Michael found David already working on the report he had requested. The project manager looked as though he had aged years in a single night, but there was a resolve in his eyes that Michael had not seen before. "Mr. Thompson," David said, standing up, I wanted to apologize. You were right. I lost sight of what truly matters." Michael nodded, accepting the apology. "What's important now, David, is that we correct our mistakes and do better from here on out." While reviewing the preliminary report together, Michael's phone rang. It was the hospital. John had been discharged and wanted to speak with him. The news further solidified Michael's conviction. The changes he was implementing weren't just about numbers or regulations. They were about real people, real families like John's. By the end of the day, Exhausted but satisfied, Michael once again looked at the partially built skyscraper. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but he was prepared to face it. With the workers' safety as a top priority and a renewed vision for the company, Michael felt he was truly honoring his father's legacy, building a better future for everyone at Thompson Construction. A week after the dramatic shutdown of operations, Michael decided it was time to reveal his true identity to John's family. He invited them to the main Thompson Construction office, determined to be completely honest. When Sarah, John, still in a wheelchair, and the triplets entered the conference room, their eyes widened at the sight of Michael's name on the door. Michael greeted them with a nervous smile. "Thank you for coming," he began. "There's something important I need to tell you." In the minutes that followed, Michael explained who he really was and why he had kept his identity hidden. He watched the family's expressions shift from surprise to confusion and finally to a complex blend of emotions. John was the first to speak, his voice trembling. You own the company, all this time." Michael nodded. "Yes, and I'm sorry I wasn't honest from the start. I wanted to understand the situation without my position influencing things." Sarah gripped John's hand, tears filling her eyes. We don't know what to say. You've done so much for us." The triplets looked from their parents to Michael, clearly puzzled by the situation. Emma, always the bravest, took a step forward. "You're still going to help us, right?" she asked in her small, determined voice. Michael knelt down to meet her gaze. "Of course I am, Emma. In fact, I want to do even more. Not just for you, but for all the families who work for my company." As the conversation continued, Michael could sense the swirl of emotions in the room. Gratitude, yes, but also understandable caution. John, in particular, seemed torn. "Mr. Thompson," John finally said, his voice shaky, "I appreciate everything you've done for us, but what happens now? Will there be consequences for those who spoke up about safety issues?" Michael immediately understood the underlying fear in the question. "Absolutely not, John. In fact, I'm implementing a new system where workers are encouraged to report any safety concerns. Your experience showed us how crucial that is." In the days and weeks that followed, Michael threw himself into reformulating Thompson Construction's safety policies. He faced pushback from some high-level executives and investors worried about costs, but he stood firm. "Safety isn't a cost, it's an investment," he repeated in endless meetings. "An investment in our workers, in our families, and in our company's future." Gradually, changes began to take shape. New safety equipment was procured, training programs were revised and expanded, and an anonymous reporting system was implemented so workers could voice concerns without fear of retaliation. A month after the initial shutdown, the first construction site reopened, now a showcase of safe practices. Michael invited John and his family for a special visit. The triplets were amazed by the massive cranes and towering structures. Equipped with tiny hard hats and safety vests, they trailed Michael on a carefully organized tour. "Look, Dad," Olivia exclaimed, pointing to a group of workers on scaffolding. "They have special ropes." John smiled, touched by his daughter's excitement and the visible improvements on site. "Safety harnesses," he explained. "They keep them safe if they slip." Michael watched the scene with a mixture of pride and humility. There was still a lot of work to do, plenty of trust to rebuild. But this moment, seeing hope in John's eyes, the wonder in the girls' faces, the silent gratitude in Sarah's, made it all worth it. As he led the family back to the office, Michael reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a chance encounter with 3 hungry triplets to a revolution in how his company operated. He knew the road ahead would still be challenging, but for the first time in a long while, he felt he was truly living the values his father had taught him. Mr. Thompson, Ava, the quietest of the triplets, tugged at his sleeve. "When I grow up, can I build tall buildings like you do?" Michael smiled, feeling a wave of emotion. "Of course you can, Ava. And when that day comes, I hope you build them not just tall, but safe and beautiful too." As the family said their farewells, Michael saw something in John and Sarah's eyes that hadn't been there before. Trust. It wasn't complete yet, not entirely, but it was a start. And for Michael, that beginning meant everything. At the end of the visit, Michael accompanied the family to the parking lot. The triplets were still buzzing with excitement, chattering about all they had seen. John, though still in a wheelchair, looked more hopeful than Michael had seen him since the accident. "Mr. Thompson," John said, extending his hand, we want to thank you, not just for what you've done for our family, but for all the changes you're making." Michael shook John's hand, feeling the weight of the moment. "No need to thank me, John. It's the least I can do. Actually, I should be thanking you. You helped me see what truly matters." Sarah, tears in her eyes, gave Michael a brief hug. "You gave us hope," she whispered. As the family got into their car, the triplets waved enthusiastically at Michael. Emma, always the spokesperson, shouted through the window, "We'll come back to see the buildings when they're finished." Michael laughed and waved back. "I can't wait," he called. Watching the car drive away, Michael felt a surge of mixed emotions. There was still much to be done. Transforming the culture of an entire company wouldn't happen overnight. There would be resistance, challenges, and undoubtedly moments of doubt. But looking back at the construction site behind him, seeing workers move with confidence, properly using their safety equipment, Michael knew he was on the right path. He pulled a worn photo of his father from his pocket. "We're doing it, Dad," he murmured. "We're doing the right thing." With one last glance at the city skyline, where Thompson Construction's skyscrapers rose against the sky, Michael headed back to his office. There was a lot of work ahead, but for the first time in ages, he felt genuinely excited about the future. Not just for the company, but for all the lives it touched. The sun set over the city, casting a golden glow over the buildings. To Michael, it felt as though the very light was endorsing the new path he'd chosen. With determined steps, he entered the building, ready to face the challenges ahead, knowing each step took him in the right direction, toward a safer, fairer, and brighter future for everyone. In the weeks following the implementation of the new safety measures at Thompson Construction, life was intense and challenging for Michael. He spent long hours at the construction sites, personally overseeing the changes and listening to the workers' concerns. Slowly, a new culture took shape in the company, one of safety, respect, and transparency. Not everyone was happy with the changes, however. One sunny Monday morning, while Michael was conducting a meeting with his safety team, his secretary burst into the room. "Mr. Thompson," she said, visibly upset, "your brother is here. He insists on speaking with you immediately." Michael felt his stomach drop. Robert, his older brother, hadn't shown up at the company in years. Ever since Michael assumed control after their father's death, Robert had distanced himself, preferring a life of luxury with his share of the inheritance. "Ask him to wait in my office," Michael replied, trying to remain calm. "I'll be there in a few minutes." When Michael entered his office, he found Robert sitting in his chair, feet propped on the desk, casually flipping through confidential documents. Robert looked up, a sardonic smile on his lips. "Ah, the prodigy child finally appears," Robert sneered, standing. "I've been reading about your recent innovations. I have to say, I'm impressed with how quickly you're destroying Dad's legacy." Michael took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay composed. "What do you want, Robert? I thought you made it clear you wanted nothing to do with this company." Robert circled the desk, approaching Michael. "Oh, that was before you started throwing money away on this nonsense of safety and worker welfare. Frankly, Michael, did you forget we're in the business of making money?" "We're in the business of building," Michael countered. "And we can't build anything of value if we don't value the people doing the real work." Robert laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "Always the idealist. Well, little brother, I came here to give you a warning. The board isn't happy. The investors are nervous. If you don't back down from these ridiculous changes, they're going to remove you from leadership. And guess who they want to put in your place?" Michael felt anger welling up in his chest. "You have no authority here, Robert. You gave up your rights in the company years ago." "Aye, but I have friends on the board," Robert sneered, "and they think the company needs more traditional leadership." Before Michael could reply, his secretary entered again. "Mr. Thompson, the board members are here for the emergency meeting they requested." Michael looked from his secretary to Robert, who was now openly smirking. "Well, looks like the fun is starting sooner than I expected." Robert said, heading for the door. "Come on, little brother. We have a show to put on." The conference room was tense when Michael and Robert entered. The board members, men and women in expensive suits, looked at the brothers with expressions ranging from concern to outright hostility. Gerald Hawthorne, the board's chairman, was the first to speak. "Michael, we called this meeting because we're deeply concerned about the direction you're taking the company. These changes you've implemented are costing millions. Investors are nervous, and frankly, many of us believe you've lost sight of what really matters." Michael looked around the table, seeing familiar faces of people he'd known for years, people who had worked with his father, who had watched him grow up. Now, they looked at him as though he were a stranger. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michael began, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions in his chest, "I understand your concerns, but I ask you to consider the bigger picture. Yes, these changes have a high initial cost, but think of the cost of lost lives, of families destroyed by preventable accidents. Think of the cost of lawsuits, of a damaged reputation." Robert interrupted with a derisive laugh. "Ever the moralist, aren't you, Michael? But business is business. Our father understood that. He built this empire by doing whatever was necessary, not worrying about sentimentality." Michael felt his blood boil. "Our father died in an accident that could have been prevented if we had prioritized safety. How can you stand there and defend the same practices that killed him?" A shocked silence fell over the room. Michael rarely spoke about his father's death, and never so openly or emotionally. Gerald cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. "Michael, no one here wants to diminish the tragedy of your father's death, but you have to understand investors are threatening to pull out. If that happens, thousands of jobs will be at risk." "Which is why," Robert interjected smoothly, "I'm offering to take over. I can calm the investors, get the company back on its profitable course. Michael can focus on his philanthropic projects." Michael looked at his brother, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. How had things come to this? How could Robert, once his best friend and confidant, stand here trying to take away everything he'd worked for? That was when something clicked in Michael's mind. A conversation he'd overheard by chance, a document he'd seen on David's desk weeks ago. Pieces of a puzzle suddenly fell into place. "Before we make any decisions," Michael said slowly, "I think there's something all of you need to know about Robert's business dealings." Robert visibly paled. "What are you talking about?" Michael turned to face his brother. "I'm talking about bribes, Robert. Secret deals with suppliers. Payoffs to inspectors to overlook safety violations. I thought it was just David, but it was you all along, wasn't it?" A heavy silence descended upon the room. Robert opened his mouth, then closed it again, looking like a fish out of water. Michael went on, his voice growing stronger. "I have proof. Emails, bank transfers, witnesses willing to testify. Robert isn't here to save the company. He's here to continue plundering it, putting profits above human lives." Board members exchanged shocked glances. Gerald looked like he might be sick. Is this true, Robert?" he stammered. Robert, regaining a bit of composure, tried to laugh. "This is absurd. Michael's obviously desperate to keep control. He'd say anything." "It's not made up," a voice came from the door. Everyone turned to see David, the project manager, entering the room. He looked pale and frightened, but determined. "I can confirm everything Mr. Thompson is saying. Robert has orchestrated these schemes for years. I was part of some of them. I'm willing to testify and hand over all the documents I have." Chaos erupted in the room. Board members shouted questions. Robert tried to defend himself, and David trembled visibly as he handed a folder full of documents to Gerald. Michael watched it all with a mix of relief and sadness. He hadn't wanted things to go this far, but he knew it was necessary. The truth had to come out for the company to truly change. Hours later, when the dust began to settle, the facts were clear. Robert would be barred from any involvement with the company, pending a full investigation. The board, though still uneasy about some of Michael's changes, agreed to give him more time and freedom to implement his reforms. After the meeting ended, Michael found Robert alone in the room, looking defeated and much older than his 40-something years. "Why, Robert?" Michael asked quietly. "Why did you do it?" Robert looked up, and for a moment, Michael saw the brother he had known in childhood, vulnerable and afraid. I just wanted to prove I could be as good as Dad, as good as you. But then it became too easy. The money, the power, I lost control. Michael felt a wave of compassion despite everything. It's not too late to change, Robert, to do the right thing. Robert laughed bitterly. Maybe for you, little brother, you were always the family hero. Me, I guess my role was always the villain. With that, Robert stood and walked out, leaving Michael alone with his thoughts and the weight of all that had happened. In the days and weeks that followed, Michael threw himself into the work of transforming Thompson Construction. With the reluctant but firm support of the board, he implemented a comprehensive worker safety and well-being program. State-of-the-art protective equipment was purchased for every site. Extensive training programs were developed, covering not just workplace safety, but also mental health and work-life balance. John Easy, the triplets' father, became a symbol of this new era. As he recovered, he was invited to lead a newly formed Workers' Safety Committee, giving employees a direct voice in company decisions. Sarah, inspired by the changes and determined to contribute, proposed a healthy meal service for the construction sites. Michael loved the idea and helped her set up the business, which soon became a hit among the workers. The triplets, Emma, Olivia, and Ava, became frequent visitors at Thompson Construction's offices. Fascinated by the building designs and models, they spent hours drawing their own constructions and peppering Michael with endless questions about architecture and engineering. Meanwhile, the legal battle against Robert played out. It was a painful and public process, but Michael was determined to see justice served, not just for himself or the company, but for every worker who had been put at risk by Robert's schemes. Eventually, after months of hearings and deliberations, the verdict came in. Robert was found guilty on multiple counts of fraud and corruption. He faced prison time and hefty fines. For Michael, it was a bittersweet victory. He had protected the company and its workers well, but at the cost of his relationship with his only brother. With the legal case resolved and his control over the company solidified, Michael turned his attention to a project he had long dreamed of, a housing complex for low-income families, built with the highest standards of quality and safety. The project was launched with great fanfare, and Michael insisted that John and his family be the first to receive a home in the new complex. It was more than just compensation. It was a symbol of a new era for Thompson Construction. On the day of the complex's opening, Michael stood alongside John and his family, watching the triplets run excitedly through the new playground. "You know," John said, his voice full of emotion, "when I had that accident, I thought it was the end of everything. Never imagined it could lead to something like this." Michael smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude. "You've taught me more than you realize, John. You reminded me of what really matters." Sarah joined them, her eyes bright with joyful tears. "The girls can't stop talking about how they want to be builders when they grow up, especially after seeing all those designs in your office." Michael chuckled. "Well, tell them there will always be a place for them at Thompson Construction. Who knows? Maybe one day they'll be running the place." As the sun set over the new housing complex, Michael reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From the dark days after his father's death, through the chance encounter with 3 starving little girls, to the recent challenges with his brother, every step, every obstacle had shaped not just the company but also himself. Thompson Construction was no longer just a construction company. It had become a community, a family, and as he looked at the smiling faces around him, workers, their families, children playing, Michael knew he was on the right path. The future would bring new challenges, no doubt. But with the solid foundations they had built, trust, respect, safety, Michael was confident they could face anything. As the lights in the complex turned on, illuminating the early evening, Michael felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years. He had honored his father's legacy, not just by erecting buildings, but by building better lives for everyone around him. And that, he realized, was the true meaning of success. As night fell over the new housing complex, Michael watched the families settling into their new homes. The sound of laughter and lively conversation filled the air, creating an atmosphere of hope and renewal. The triplets, Emma, Olivia, and Ava, ran back and forth, exploring every corner of their new home with childlike enthusiasm. John and Sarah looked on, smiling wearily but happily, finally seeing a bright future ahead. Michael stepped back a bit, wanting to give the family a private moment to take it all in. He wandered to the edge of the complex, where he could see the city unfolding before him. The skyscrapers his company had built over the years stood out against the night sky, but now he saw them with fresh eyes. Each building represented not just an architectural achievement, but the lives of the people who had constructed it. Michael made a silent vow that, from that day on, every Thompson construction project would be a testament to the value and dignity of its workers. Reflecting on the events of the past few months, Michael felt a swirl of emotions, pride in what they had achieved, sorrow for the break with his brother, and a renewed determination for the future. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Transforming an entire industry was a monumental challenge, but gazing at the warm lights of the new complex, at the happy families and proud workers, Michael knew every effort was worth it. With one last look at the city he had helped build, Michael returned to join the celebration. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, he faced it not with fear but with hope and purpose. As he approached the gathering, the triplets ran up to him, their excited voices overlapping as they shared their plans to become builders like Uncle Michael. He laughed, scooping Ava into his arms while Emma and Olivia clung to his hands. In that moment, surrounded by people who had become much more than employees or recipients of his charity, Michael understood that he had built something far more valuable than any skyscraper, a community. And so, under the stars of a night filled with promise, this chapter drew to a close. But for Michael Thompson, and all those whose lives he had touched, it was only the beginning of a new and exciting journey. A year had passed since the opening of the housing complex, and Thompson Construction had transformed almost beyond recognition. What had once been just another company chasing profits was now a model of ethical practice and social responsibility in the industry. On a sunny Saturday morning, the housing complex was in full celebration mode. Colorful banners fluttered in the breeze, cheerful music filled the air, and the aroma of barbecue and cotton candy mingled, creating a festive atmosphere. Michael Thompson stood at the center of it all, a genuine smile lighting up his face as he greeted residents, workers, and their families. He could hardly believe how much had changed in just 1 year. John, fully recovered from his accident, approached Michael, walking with a slight limp but with pride shining in his eyes. "Mr. Thompson," he said, extending his hand. "Or should I say boss?" Michael laughed, pulling John into a hug. "Please, John. How many times do I have to say it? It's just Michael to you." John smiled, adjusting the badge on his chest, identifying him as a safety supervisor. "Still getting used to all this. Who would have thought a year ago I was stuck in a hospital bed, not knowing if I'd walk again?" "You earned it, John," Michael said sincerely. "Your dedication to worker safety has been invaluable. Accident rates have dropped by 90% since you took over." Not far away, Sarah was organizing a team of employees serving healthy and delicious meals to the crowd. Her business providing food for the work sites had grown exponentially, and now she employed dozens of people in the community. "Sarah," Michael called out, approaching the food stand, "everything is perfect as always." Sarah smiled, wiping her forehead with her apron. "Thank you, Michael. I still wonder how we got here. Feels like a dream." "A dream you made real with your hard work," Michael replied. "You're feeding not just the bodies but the spirits of our workers." Suddenly, an excited shout rang out. "Uncle Michael! Uncle Michael!" Michael turned to see the triplets, Emma, Olivia, and Ava, running toward him. Now almost 5 years old, the girls had grown and flourished over the past year. "Look what we made at school," Emma exclaimed, holding up a colorful drawing. Michael knelt down to their eye level, examining the picture. It was a child's rendering, but surprisingly detailed, of a skyscraper. "Wow, this is amazing," he praised them. "Did you draw it yourselves?" Olivia nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, the teacher said we could be engineers someday, just like you." "I want to build houses for everyone," Ava added shyly. Michael felt his heart swell with emotion. These girls, whom he had met in such desperate circumstances, were now filled with hope and dreams for the future. The celebration continued throughout the day with speeches, performances, and plenty of fun. As the sun began to set, Michael was called to a small makeshift stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," the city's mayor announced, "please join me in honoring a man who has transformed not just a company, but an entire community. Michael Thompson." The crowd erupted in applause as Michael took the stage, feeling slightly uncomfortable with all the attention. "Michael Ching," the mayor went on behalf of the city and all the citizens whose lives you've touched, we want to present you with this award for excellence in ethical construction." Michael accepted the award, a beautiful crystal plaque, feeling humbled and grateful. Looking at the crowd, he saw smiling faces, eyes shining with hope. He saw John and Sarah beaming with pride. He saw the triplets jumping up and down with excitement. "Thank you," Michael began, his voice catching with emotion, "but this award isn't just mine. It belongs to every worker who risked their life on our sites. It belongs to every family that endured uncertainty and fear. It belongs to John, Sarah, and their lovely daughters, who reminded me of what truly matters." He paused, drawing a deep breath. "A year ago, we stood at a crossroads. We could have continued down the easy path, prioritizing profit over people. But we chose a different way, a path of compassion, responsibility, and community. Look around us," he gestured to the housing complex. "This isn't just a set of buildings. It's proof of what we can achieve when we put people first, when we build not just with bricks and mortar, but with care and respect. This is only the beginning," Michael concluded. "Together, we'll keep building, not just structures, but a better future for all of us." The applause was deafening as Michael left the stage. He was immediately surrounded by hugs, handshakes, and words of gratitude. As night fell, the celebration reached its peak. A huge birthday cake was brought to the center of the complex's plaza. On it, 5 candles glowed, representing not only the triplets' birthday but also the first anniversary of the housing complex. "Emma, Olivia, Ava," Michael called. "How about we go up top to blow out these candles?" The girls' eyes went wide with excitement. "Really?" Emma asked in disbelief. "Sure," Michael smiled. "After all, you're the stars tonight." With John and Sarah's enthusiastic permission, Michael led the triplets to the elevator. They rode to the top floor of the main building, stepping out onto a terrace with a panoramic view of the city. The city lights glittered in the distance, creating a magical backdrop. The cake had been carefully transported upstairs and now awaited them, its candles dancing gently in the night breeze. "Wow," Ava whispered, gazing at the view. "It's like we can touch the stars," Olivia added, her eyes shining. Michael knelt beside the girls. "You know," he said softly, "when I first met you, I never imagined we'd end up here. You've changed my life as much as I've changed yours." Emma, always the most perceptive, looked at Michael seriously. "You saved us, Uncle Michael. You saved everyone." Michael felt tears prick his eyes. "No, sweetheart, we saved each other." Clearing his throat, he continued, "Now, how about we make a wish and blow out these candles?" The triplets nodded eagerly. Holding hands, they moved closer to the cake, their small faces solemn with concentration. 1, 2, 3, Michael counted. With one collective puff, the 5 candles went out, leaving only the moon and stars to light the terrace. As the girls celebrated, jumping and laughing, Michael gazed out at the city below. He thought of all the lives transformed over the past year. John Akatsiho's now an unwavering advocate for workers' safety. Sarah, a successful entrepreneur nourishing not only bodies, but hopes. The triplets, once starving and desperate, now bursting with dreams and possibilities. And he thought of himself. The executive, once fixated on numbers, had become a man who understood that a business's real worth lay in its impact on people. "Uncle Michael," Ava's voice brought him back to the present. "What did you wish for?" Michael smiled, pulling the 3 girls into a hug. "I already have everything I could wish for right here," he answered. As he embraced the triplets, with the city lights twinkling below and the stars glittering above, Michael knew this wasn't an ending, but a new beginning. A fresh horizon brimming with promise and possibility. Together, They were ready to build an even brighter future, one brick at a time. As the group headed down from the terrace to rejoin the celebration, Michael reflected on the symbolism of that moment. The triplets, once so vulnerable, were now on top of the world, literally and figuratively. It was a living testament to the transformation he had sparked. Back at the party, John and Sarah welcomed the girls with warm hugs. The crowd applauded and sang happy birthday, the sound echoing through the night. Michael watched the scene with a serene smile. He saw workers chatting animatedly with their families, children playing without a care, and seniors enjoying the security of their new homes. This was the true legacy of Thompson Construction now, not just buildings, but lives transformed. As the celebration stretched into the night, Michael found a moment of quiet. He looked up at the starry sky, thinking of his father and even his brother, Robert. There was a tinge of sadness, but also a sense of peace. He had honored the true spirit of his family's business, even if the path was different from what his father or brother might have imagined. As the night wore on, families began heading back to their homes, tired children asleep in their parents' arms, weary but happy smiles on everyone's faces. Michael helped the cleanup crew, determined to show that no task was beneath him. Finally, when the last guest left and the place was tidy, Michael stood alone in the center of the plaza. He looked around at the buildings his company had raised, not just with concrete and steel, but with compassion and respect. With one final glance at the night sky, Michael made a silent promise. He would keep building, not just structures, but hopes, dreams, and futures. And with that promise in his heart, he walked home, ready for the next chapter of his journey. The chapter ends here, but the story of Thompson Construction and the lives it touched would continue to unfold, day by day, brick by brick, building a better world for everyone.